The Egyptian Revolution of 2011 was an important event where the people of Egypt came together to say they were unhappy with the way their country was being run. It all started because many Egyptians felt they were not being treated fairly. They wanted a better life, more freedom, and a government that listened to them. Imagine you're in a classroom where the teacher never listens to you, doesn't give you enough to eat, and lets only a few students play with the toys. The rest of you have to sit quietly, even if you're hungry or unhappy. That's how many Egyptians felt for almost 30 years. A man named Hosni Mubarak was the leader of Egypt. He was like the teacher in this story. Some people thought he was good at keeping the classroom calm, but others felt he didn't care about their needs. People were upset because they didn't have enough money to buy food or take care of their families. They couldn't find jobs, even though they were educated. They weren't allowed to say what they thought without getting into trouble. On top of this, the police in Egypt were very strict. If someone said or did something the government didn't like, they could be arrested or hurt. People started feeling like they couldn't breathe under all these rules. The revolution began in January 2011. Before that, something happened in a nearby country called Tunisia. People there also felt their leader was unfair, and they protested until he left his job. When Egyptians saw this, they thought, if they can do it, so can we. It all started with a small protest on January 25, 2011, in Cairo, Egypt's capital city. People gathered in a big square called Tahrir Square, which means Liberation Square. At first, the government didn't take it seriously, but more and more people joined. They were not just from Cairo. They came from all over Egypt. The protesters had clear demands. 1. Hosni Mubarak must step down as the leader. 2. The government should stop being unfair and listen to the people. 3. The police should stop being mean and violent. Lastly, people wanted free elections to choose their leaders. They shouted slogans like bread, freedom, and social justice. The people want the fall of the regime. At first, the protests were peaceful. People sang songs, held signs, and marched together. But soon, the government tried to stop them. Here's how things escalated. 1. Police and tear gas. The police used tear gas, water cannons, and even rubber bullets to scare people away. But the protesters stayed strong and refused to leave. 2. Internet shutdown. The government turned off the internet and mobile phones, so people couldn't talk to each other or share news. But this didn't stop the protests. People still found ways to gather and spread the word. 3. Violence. As the protests grew, things became more dangerous. There were clashes between the protesters and the police. Some people were hurt, and sadly, some even died. This made more people angry, and even more joined the protests. On February 1, 2011, something big happened. Over 1 million people gathered in Tahrir Square. The square was filled with people of all ages, young, old, rich, poor, men, women, and even children. They all had one goal: to make their voices heard. At this point, Mubarak tried to calm the crowd. He gave a speech and said, "I will not run for president again." but I'll stay until the next election to make sure things are smooth. But the people didn't trust him. They wanted him to leave immediately. The Egyptian army played an interesting role. Unlike the police, the army didn't attack the protesters. Soldiers were sent to Tahrir Square, but instead of fighting, they just stood there. Some soldiers even joined the protesters. This gave the people more confidence. The army leaders later said they would not use force against the people. This was a big win for the protesters because it meant they could continue without fearing the army. Finally, on February 11, 2011, after 18 days of protests, Hosni Mubarak stepped down. It was a historic moment. People in Tahrir Square celebrated by cheering, dancing, and waving the Egyptian flag. They felt like they had won a big battle without using weapons. Mubarak handed over power to the army, and the protesters went home, hoping for a better future. Even though the revolution succeeded in removing Mubarak, Egypt faced many challenges afterward. 1. New leaders. The army took charge for a while, but people wanted a civilian government. In 2012, an election was held, and a man named Mohamed Morsi became the new president. But not everyone liked him, and he was removed in 2013. 2. Instability. For several years, Egypt went through a lot of ups and downs. People argued about what kind of government they wanted. Some wanted more religious influence, while others wanted a secular state. 3. Police brutality. Unfortunately, the problem of police violence didn't go away completely. Many people still feel the government doesn't listen to them.